Well, I'm going to talk about a number of things today. I'm going to talk about dreams and goals and leadership and how it all comes together. One of my favorite sayings is a Yogi Berraism. If you don't know where you're going, you're surely going to end up somewhere else. And I think you all kind of need to know where you're going. Hopefully you know where you're going right now. But you ought to have a goal of where I want to get to. And a little bit, you know, I never dreamed I was going to be an astronaut. And I'm going to use my story a little bit to talk about having goals and not giving up. And then I want to talk some key leadership points. And if we have time, we'll go into space shuttle training and all that other stuff. But I want to tell you how I got from here to here. And it was having a goal and being persistent in it and not giving up. When I was a small boy, I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up in Minneapolis, actually, but we had a family farm up near Bemidji, Minnesota, and I spent all my summers up there working on the farm. And I always tell folks, going around in circles on an 80-acre field, it's a lot like being in space. You're just going a lot faster in space going around in circles. But, you know, all I had the goal was I wanted to fly airplanes. And, you know, milking cows is not a way to live. That was a long time ago. That's my uncle actually milking that cow. And I had a passion for cycling. And I want to talk about, y'all have to have a passion for something, all right? Because if you don't have a passion for it, you're not going to succeed at it. And if you had a passion for it when you're young, doesn't mean you have to give it up when you get older either. I had a passion for cycling. I did a lot of biking. And I love fast cars, and my first car, it wasn't all that fast. I got up to 104. That TR3, I had this used TR3 that had been restored. It was really nice, little black roadster, and 4-cylinder tractor engine, and easy to maintain. But so remember having a passion for something, bicycles and black roadsters. When I was a young boy, we took a trip to Washington. We actually went to Baltimore to see my aunt. But we went to the Smithsonian, and it was before the Air and Space Museum, but they still had the Spirit of St. Louis and the Wright Flyer hanging from the ceiling. And I will never forget that. I can remember it to this day. And I don't know if that's what started my passion to want to learn how to fly, but it definitely planted a seed. And we used to drive from Minneapolis up to the family farm in Bemidji. We'd drive through Little Falls, Minnesota, and that was the hometown of Charles Lindbergh. That's where he grew up, and they had a statue there, and we used to drive by that statue. And I just remember reading his book about flying across the Atlantic solo, and he was one of my boyhood heroes. When I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy, I got to see Apollo 13 launch. And I remember walking through the vehicle assembly building, seeing these Saturn V rockets stacked up to go to the moon. Little did I know that one day I'd be back there as the director of the Kennedy Space Center. But I held astronauts in such high esteem. I said, man, I don't think I could ever do that. But that kind of sparked a goal there also, a dream that, hey, maybe I could do that. You know, Jim Lovell was a Naval Academy graduate, Navy pilot, test pilot, and he was commanding that mission to the moon. I flew A6s in the Marine Corps. When I graduated from the Naval Academy, I chose a commission in the United States Marine Corps. And when I got down to pilot training, so here's this young boy, all he ever wanted to do since he was 5 years old was fly airplanes. Used to read every book I could about flying, being in, you know, the test pilots back in the 50s and 60s, and all the aces of World War II in Korea. And I said, this is what I want to do. And I graduated from the Naval Academy, and I took a commission in the United States Marine Corps, and I got down to Pensacola, Florida, and I flunked my eye test. And I said, holy mackerel, you know, this is the end of my dream. And I said, do I qualify to be a naval flight officer? How many have seen the movie Top Gun? All right. You remember the guy in the back seat, Goose? He was a naval flight officer. Well, I went through all the training, earned my wings as an NFO, and I became a bombardier navigator in A6 intruders. Well, every year I passed my eye test. And I said, well, I want to be a pilot, like I started out. You know, I'd flunked this eye test. They said the refractive error in your right eye is too great. Really, they just had more pilots in pilot training than they knew what to do with. And if they could find any technicality, they were finding ways to get folks out of the program. So they said, well, we don't believe you can see. So I had all these tests, and they said, okay, you can see. But then we're too short ANFOs, we need you to go overseas. So I went overseas, worked hard, did a good job, and I had this Marine General, Lieutenant General Norm Gorley. He gave me this award for being a good guy, slapped me on the back, said, "Bob, you ever need anything, just come see me." So I did. And I said, "General, they want me to go back and be a flight instructor in A6 or as a bombardier navigator, and I really want to go back to pilot training." And I got my orders changed to go back to Pensacola to be a pilot. So I didn't to pilot training on the first try, but it was a goal that I had, and I persisted and was able to make it down there, and ended up, unfortunately, all the planes that I've flown are in museums now. This is at the this is at the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, and that's an A6E tram, which is an awesome machine, but unfortunately it's in a museum. But I said, I want to be a test pilot. You know, I want to use all that math and engineering that I had back in school along with being a pilot, and as soon as I had 1,000 hours of flight time in the A6, I put in for test pilot school. And I got this letter back and they said, "Sorry, Bob, we don't need any A6 pilots right now, but we'll keep your application on file." And I was fortunate enough to get picked up 6 months later to go to Navy test pilot school. And man, that was awesome. That was my graduation exercise. I got 4 flights in an F-104 and basically had to write all the performance and handling qualities in a report on that airplane. And I mean, we're talking, this is all handheld data with, you know, measuring tapes and handheld force gauges, and you know, it's pretty neat what you can learn in a year at test pilot school and what you're able to do with it when you get out. And then as a test pilot, I got to do some really neat things. I did the Navy evaluation on the 81 oblique wing aircraft. You can sweep wings on an aircraft aft, you can sweep them forward. The reason we have aft swept wings to go supersonic is because if you sweep them forward, there's an effect that's called wash-in, and basically the wings rip off the airplane, and that's bad when you're flying. So with the new composites, you can lay up a wing now that it's strong enough that you can actually sweep the wings forward, and there are some advantages to that because it moves the wing box aft, and so you have more volume at the CG of the airplane for passengers, that sort of thing. This was a unique design in that the wing swept one aft, one forward, and it created some neat handling qualities. But it was just an experimental aircraft to see if it was even feasible. So I got to fly that, plus a whole bunch of other neat stuff. But I said, I want to be an astronaut, you know, and NASA was taking applications. They took the first group of shuttle astronauts in 1978. 35 of them. They took another group in 1980, and that's when I got to test pilot school. In 1984, they were taking the next group, and I said, darn it, I qualify. I actually could do this. And I submitted all the paperwork, the applications, made it through the Marine Corps selection, NASA selection, got down to Houston, spent a week down there, passed the physical, and I said, man, I just can't wait for that call that says, Bob, come on down. And the call came, and they said, sorry, Bob, you didn't make it. And boy, was I disappointed. But they said, we're going to take some more next year. We'd like you to try again. So I went through that whole process a second time and was fortunate enough to get picked up in 1985. So didn't get pilot training on the first try, didn't get to test pilot school on the first try, and didn't get to be an astronaut on the first try. But persistence paid off. And you know, my goal to be an astronaut, it's really hard to set your goals that far out. What you really need to do is set an intermediate goal that's going to get you there and work toward that one. And then when you achieve that goal, then set your next goal and move on. So having passion for something definitely helps. Being persistent and never giving up. These are keys to success in your life. And along with that are a lot of great leadership traits that we'll talk about. I just want to throw this stuff in because I love airplanes. You know, I got to fly the T-38s. That was a lot of fun. That's a cockpit inside one of a NASA T-38s climbing through, looks like 28,600 and some feet there. Another view of that cockpit. They've modified them further now. Where all those round engine instruments are, that's a big multifunction flat panel display there, and in the middle, more of a glass cockpit. I just threw that in because it's cool. You know, it's kind of one of those gee whiz shots. That was my first crew. Landing the space shuttle. You know, it's pretty cool the first time you get to land the space shuttle. Well, how do you do that? You can practice those L/D approaches in a T-38. It's not quite the same. So we got a modified Grumman Gulfstream 2, and it's got a digital computer in the back with a model following routine of the orbiter aerodynamics. And up in the front, Over in the left seat, all the controls and displays are just like the space shuttle. In the right seat, where the instructor pilot sits, it's a normal G2. We climbed that thing up to 30,000 feet over the lake bed out there at White Sands, New Mexico, or at the shuttle landing facility. Lower the landing gear, engage the simulation, and you move that stick over there, it sends an electrical input to the computer. The computer says, okay, if I were the space shuttle, what would I do? And with direct lift flaps and in-flight thrust reversing, you're in a 20-degree dive at 295 knots, and it flies just like the space shuttle. It's pretty cool. That's what it looks like out the heads-up display in the shuttle training aircraft landing at runway 33 there at the Kennedy Space Center. There's a landing at Edwards Air Force Base out the window on the pilot's side. A happy crew on orbit, my last flight. The space shuttle today has an all-glass cockpit. We got rid of all those steam gauges, too hard to maintain. Electronic displays are much easier to maintain, and they're all pretty much the same, cockpit layouts on modern aircraft. You can fly the shuttle from the aft station or the forward station. This is a rendezvous. That's what it looked like out the window when we rendezvoused with the functional cargo block. We'd already attached Node 1 to the payload bay. And I'm skipping over a lot of this. I'm just kind of giving you a flavor of what we did. We can talk more later, and I got slides at the end if there's time. Too fast. Flying a robotic arm. Again, working robotics in space. It's just like flying another vehicle, only you're flying the end of this arm. That's what the space station looked like when I left it in December of 1998. It's grown a lot since then. That's inside Node 1. Oh, I just talking about, I retired from the Marine Corps. That's my daughter. I threw that in and got my name on that jet. If you go out to El Paso, Texas, there's a jet sitting out there on static display that says Bob Cabana on it. That's about, everything that I've flown kind of ends up sitting around somewhere. Now they're going to put the space shuttles in a museum. I love farming. I've got a 1950 Farmall C that's fully restored. It's up in Minnesota. I still ride bicycle. That's my specialized road bike, and I try and get in at least 30 miles every Saturday morning and a couple rides during the week. But this time of year, it's kind of hard to ride at night in the dark. I don't like doing that. And I still like black roadsters. I got a 350Z, and it goes a little bit more than that little TR3 did. And I still have a passion for flying. The airplanes are a little different. They go a lot slower. Not a whole lot of instrumentation in a Cessna 152, but I got checked out in a Cessna 162, and it's got a glass cockpit. That's kind of nice. But the key here is that, you got to have a dream. You got to know where you're going, or you're not going to get there. And you got to have a passion for what you're doing. And don't give up on the things that you love now. Keep working toward it. Stay interested in, make sure you're doing something you enjoy. Because if you enjoy doing it, you're going to excel at it, all right? And nobody's going to do well at something that they don't enjoy. So if you're not enjoying what you're doing right now, maybe you got the wrong, you're doing the wrong thing. Think about that. And keep your options open. I hope a lot of you have an opportunity to intern or co-op as you're going through school. And that really gives you an advantage to see what's out there in the world. And if you co-op with a company, don't necessarily do the same job with them. I encourage the co-ops that come to NASA, maybe work in one organization one summer or semester and go somewhere else another semester to broaden your horizons, open things up, and ask questions of one another. Learn from your other students and share with one another so that you got a good idea of what you're doing and where you want to go. But you're not going to get anywhere and be successful if you don't have leadership, all right? Today in industry, I think one of the most important things that we want to grow are leaders, okay? People talk about managers. I hate the word manager. At the Kennedy Space Center, we don't have managers. We have leaders, and that's what we need. And I think one of the most important qualities of a leader is integrity. And people aren't born leaders. Some folks are a lot more charismatic than others, all right? And you say, man, he's a natural leader. And some folks have a little bit about that. But all of us can learn to be good leaders. I was probably the most meek, mild-mannered, bashful, shy kid growing up, but I learned leadership. I learned it at the Naval Academy. I learned it in the United States Marine Corps. I learned it at NASA. I learned it from the jobs I had. And it grows over time, all right? But you can learn it. It's not something that's just inherent to everybody. And if you're not a good leader, you're not going to succeed. And you can be a leader in the teams that you're in right now. There's different kinds of leadership. You know, there's where you're assigned to work over a team, but as a member of a team, there's influence leadership. You know, how you get the team to work together. So I think it's very important. And I would encourage all of you to have a journal, all right? Go ahead and start it right now, or a leadership folder. And you may think, well, geez, I don't have anything to do with that. I just got all I can do to get through what I'm doing. But over time, okay, and it may not be as important right now, but it's going to be down the road. If you have this, anytime you see an article on leadership or you learn something, throw it in that folder. And think about, okay, what do I want to do when I'm a leader? All right? How am I going to be? And if you could even write out your philosophy of leadership, all right, and work on it over time. Use people as examples, okay? There's a lot of good and bad leaders in the world. And when you're in a group, when you're in a team, you know, if you see something that you think, wow, that's really a good idea, that worked really well, I want to do that, write it down so you don't forget it. Throw it in that leadership folder. I got one in my desk. I still put stuff in and out of it all the time. If you see somebody that's doing something that, boy, I cannot believe that he's treating us this way or he's doing it that way. Well, when I was in the astronaut office, the guy that was chief of the astronaut office before me, his name was Hoot Gibson, and Hoot had a saying, nobody's useless. They can always serve as a bad example. All right? So put those bad examples in there too and say, I am not going to do that. That is not going to be me. Now, I want to talk about what I think are key attributes of leadership that you need to take with you. And I think first and foremost is integrity. And at NASA, we have 4 core values. You know, in the Marine Corps, we only had 3, but Marines, you know, you got to give them something. Courage, honor, commitment. Okay? At NASA, our core values are safety, integrity, teamwork, and excellence. And if I just talk about those 4 core values for a minute, you know, safety is inherent in everything we do. And it's not just safety launching people into space. It's safety in the workplace. Today, safety accidents, they cost money, they hurt people, they decrease productivity, and it's just not right. Safety is paramount. Integrity. And I'll talk more about integrity, but it's not, especially for engineers, it's not just integrity and not lying. I mean, at NASA, to me, it's an integrity to deal with the resources that have been entrusted to you, that we don't abuse our resources, that we don't use them for our personal gain, that we don't take advantage, but it's the integrity of, as an engineer also. You know, when you say something is so, it's so. We don't fudge data. We don't, when we give our word on something, that's our word. And it's really important today. Not just the financial, you know, what you read about with big businessmen and how they run amok and, you know, end up in jail. It's engineering, it's technical integrity also. That is really important. Teamwork to me is people, taking care of the people. I'll talk more about that. And excellence, I mean, to me that's NASA. Technical excellence, it's all that we do. And if you run those 4 core values together, you know, safety, integrity, teamwork, and excellence, you end up with mission success. They all roll together. So I think that's key. But let's talk a little bit about integrity. You know, it's how we conduct ourselves. You have to continually establish and exhibit honesty and truthfulness in all that you do. If you don't have integrity as a leader, your folks are going to see right through you. You know, if you're going to lose all credibility if they know that you're not telling them the truth, you're not being straight with them, or they see you doing something that's not right. You know, you have to be a positive example at all times. Don't be that negative example, all right? But if you don't have integrity in dealing with the people that work for you, as an engineer, as a senior leader, you've lost them. You're not going to succeed. It's critical. Develop an environment of trust and ethical behavior. Total honesty in dealing with the people who work for you and those that you work for. And it's total honesty in dealing with the resources of the organization that you're a part of or that you're leading. And never abuse your position for personal gain. That's integrity. If you can adhere to all of that, you'll avoid all the problems that you see some of these senior leaders end up in. But more importantly, you'll establish the trust of the people that work for you. You'll have a more successful organization, and you'll be able to lead them. A vision for the future. Remember what I said, that Yogi Berraism at the beginning? If you don't know where you're going, you're certainly going to end up somewhere else. But if you can't communicate a clear vision of where you're going to the organization that you're working with, how in the heck do you expect to get there? You know, you might know where you want to go, but if you can't communicate to that team that you're working with, you are going to end up somewhere else, not where you wanted to go. So it's critical that you have a clear vision of the future and that you communicate that to the team, to your organization, and work to get their buy-in. You can't dictate it to them, all right? You can communicate it to them, but you got to get them to buy into it too and help it to be their vision also if you're going to be successful. If it's just your vision, you're not going to get there. Communication. You know, in all that I've dealt with, all the problems that I've ever seen, I don't care if it's a technical problem or a people problem, it usually comes down to poor communication. You know, on the technical side, somebody didn't clearly communicate the requirements for what it was you were trying to do. Somebody misunderstood, heard something, you know, it was English units instead of metric units, whatever, all right? And you end up plowing into Mars instead of going around it. It's communication, okay? It's critical. Personnel problems. Usually, you know, somebody didn't communicate something properly. And if you get folks to sit around the table and look each other in the eye, you know, you can usually get to the root of the problem. And you cannot communicate enough. All forms of communication. You know, we have so many forms today. I got a blog at KSC. You know, I text, but you know, I send out written notes, I send out electronic notes, I have all hands where I talk to folks in person, call them up on the telephone. You know, email is great, but how many times have you emailed somebody or text somebody that's sitting right next to you or right around the corner or something? You know, think how much more you could have gotten out of that communication if you'd have walked over and looked them in the eye and talked to them and gotten that nonverbal body communication along with it. I don't know about all of you, but I've sure had a few of my emails misinterpreted. They may have come across as a really angry email when it was never meant to be that way, you know. So, but if you'd have sat down and talked to somebody, and I caution all of you on email, okay, it's real easy when something just really gets your goat, and you sit down and you type that email, and go ahead and do that. Just don't hit send. Okay, come back to it a few hours later, the next day, look at it and then hit send. And if you still want it to be that way, you know, okay. But you might want to modify it a little bit. But communication, it's critical today. And everybody wants things faster, and communication is so intertwined. But if you can communicate clearly, you can avoid a lot of problems. Compassion and respect. You know, you have to show a genuine understanding of and care for the people that work for you and with you. You know, if you don't have compassion and respect for them as human beings, they're not going to respect you. You got to get to know them. You got to get to know their families, the names of their kids. You got to know when they're having problems. It's really, really important. Always put the welfare of the people that work for you ahead of your own. And you know, if we respect each other and ourselves, it's just going to work out so much better. And that comes from being good citizens. It's the right thing to do. And you know, that gets into diversity and just having respect for everybody. And diversity is more than just, you know, gender, skin color, and so on. It's diversity of thought. And the way you're going to get the best solution to a problem is not having a bunch of people that all think like you do. It's by having diverse opinions and then listening to everybody. Allow everybody to voice their concerns, get their thoughts out on the table. And if you do that, you're going to have the best information and you're going to be able to come to the best solution. One of my favorite examples, Mike Coates, who's the director at the Johnson Space Center, he's a white male Navy pilot, all right? And he got selected in the first group of 35 new astronauts to fly the space shuttle. And in his group were, you know, black pilots, white engineers, black engineers, and then they had all these mission specialists who were PhD physicists and astrobiologists and men and women, black and white, you name it. And, you know, when he took all those military guys and looked at them, they may have had different color skin and so on, but they all thought the same. The diversity of thought came with all those weird scientists, okay? So you gotta, hey, engineers are pretty straightforward, but some of those scientists, I don't know. So you want to have diversity, okay? So remember that. And different backgrounds bring different things to the table and help you get to the best solution to a problem. And everybody deserves to be heard, all right? But once you make a decision, if you don't do what somebody else really strongly felt was the right answer and you come to a different answer to the problem, that person deserves to be heard also in why. And you need to go back and explain, okay, you had a great idea, I listened to you, but we're going to do this for this reason, and this is why we're not going to do it your way. And that's required also. But diversity of thought, really important. Technical and professional excellence. You know, to be a good leader of an organization, you've at one time have had to exhibit technical excellence in your field. If you were just mediocre or subpar, it's very hard to lead a very hard-charging, dynamic group of achievers. That doesn't mean, you know, gosh, I'd be hard-pressed to go back and do Laplace transforms and Diffie-Qs right now. But at one time I was really good at them. But, you know, over time, you can't stay up with everything. You can kind of stay up with general trends. And you guys are a heck of a lot smarter than I was when I was in school. But I have a background such that when I go to a meeting with a bunch of NASA engineers, I'm still smart enough to know what's being presented to me in understanding the data. And, you know, I might not be able to solve the problem, but I've got enough common sense based on my experience and previous performance that I can use what I have to evaluate what they're doing and say, yeah, that looks like they're doing the right thing here. Or I'll ask questions to help understand better and make sure that they've thought of all the right things. So you're never going to, it's very difficult as you rise up within leadership positions. And one of the hardest things, gosh, you know, I'd love to get down in there and solve the problem and do the work. But that's not my job anymore. I have other people that do that detailed technical work. And if you're a leader and you're down in the weeds doing that, you're not doing your job. Because as you continue to rise up, you know, you have other people do that. You got to trust them to do it. And I think that's one of the hardest things that I had to learn. You know, I always felt I could do it better myself and didn't always trust people to do it on their own. And it really makes life hard, because that's a lot of work as you have more and more responsibility. And you have to learn to hire good people, to give them the resources that they need to do the job, and then you have to trust them to do it. You have to hold them accountable. You have to clearly explain what's expected and hold them accountable. But you can't do it for them, but you can provide them the tools. And if you do that, they're going to be happier in their job, and you're going to be more productive in yours, doing it up and out and kind of coordinating the whole effort as opposed to doing it, because there just aren't enough hours in the day to do it all. So technical excellence is really important. You may not have all the details, but you ought to know what questions to ask to make sure that the team is headed in the right direction and they're doing it right. Motivation and commitment. You know, you got to be driven to excellence. You got to be motivated to do what you're doing, and really believe in it. If you don't believe in it, if you're not motivated to do what you're being asked to do, you know, then you're going to have a lousy product and you're not going to get it done. Sometimes, as a leader, you may be directed by your leader to do something you don't necessarily want to do. You don't necessarily think it's the right thing as far as the answer to the problem or whatever. You have a choice then. You know, you can say, all right, I've been given my direction, I'm going to go execute it and make sure my team gets this done. Or you can say, you know, maybe this organization isn't for me, maybe it's time I move on and do something else. But, you know, and that makes life hard. But you have to also understand when it's your job to get something done, you got to get it done. You got to be motivated to do it. So that motivation's important. So you got to find out, you know, okay, I may not totally believe in this, but I believe, you know, I can leave, or I can stay and make sure that it gets done right to the best of my ability with my team and work it that way. I'd have never got where I am if I didn't enjoy flying airplanes and enjoy technical problems and doing all the things that I've done. It was fun, all right? I loved it. I was motivated to do it. If you don't have that desire to have fun in what you're doing, if it's not enjoyable to you, if you're not motivated, you're not going to be successful. So, you know, in that regard, I encourage all of you, when you do get your degree and you're looking for work and you go off, don't take a job just to have a job. Now, sometimes you end up doing things that you don't necessarily want to do out of necessity, all right? But if you can find something that you really enjoy doing, you're going to be so much happier, and your boss is going to be so much happier with you because you're going to excel at what you're doing. Leadership is one of my passions. I just think it's so important today, in today's world, in engineering today, that we have good leaders. Technical skills are really, really important. And I'm so glad all of you are in the engineering field. We need more good engineers if we're going to remain a world leader. And along with that goes leadership. It really, really is important. Getting back to taking care of your people and stuff, you should never expect more out of the people than you'd give of yourself. That would be totally unfair, all right? So demand a lot out of them, and they'll give you what you demand. You know, that's another reason why you can't do it for them. You got to learn, okay? Think back on how you learn things. You don't learn by having somebody else do it for you. You learn by doing. And that goes, I hope that when all you graduate and you end up in good engineering companies, I hope that you get to actually get some hands-on time doing a project. And that you make mistakes, okay? People make mistakes. We're all human. There's only one guy that walked on this earth that didn't make any mistakes, okay? The true measure of a person is not the mistakes he makes. It's how he recovers after those mistakes. And if you make a mistake learning, you know, on a small project, it's okay. But remember that, so that when you're given responsibility for a larger project, you don't make the mistake again where it could become critical and the whole program could fail. But don't be too hard on your people when they make mistakes, because they're going to make mistakes. But make sure that you give them, you know, now there's malicious mistakes, or there's, you know, some mistakes out of incompetence. That's intolerable. And then there are honest mistakes. And if somebody makes an honest mistake, you know, don't be too hard on them, all right? Help them learn from it so that they can do better in the future and not make that mistake again. I could go on and on here, but I want to do two more things, and then I'll open up for questions. And I haven't even nearly got through half my notes here, but I want to share a leadership quote for you. And this is by Teddy Roosevelt. And one of the hardest things to do, and one of the most important things that we do, is rate our people, give them performance appraisals. And to tell somebody he's doing a good job, that's a piece of cake. But to tell somebody they're not doing a good job, that's really hard, and how they can improve and how they can do better. So this is from 100 years ago or so, but I think it's every bit as important today. No one enjoys addressing others' deficiencies, but failure to do so sends the message that people are on track when they really aren't. and that may be the greatest disservice a leader can do to someone else. If leaders are careless about basic things, telling the truth, respecting moral codes, proper professional conduct, who can believe them on other issues? The best leader is the one who has sense enough to pick good people to do what he or she wants done, and self-restraint enough to keep from meddling with them while they're doing it. And that one quote there, to me, sums up leadership. And then I got one other that I want to share with you a little bit. And this is the difference between a leader and a manager. Remember I said we don't have managers at KSC, we have leaders. And here's the difference between a leader and a manager. Managers push their people. Leaders pull theirs by sheer force of personal example. Managers order their personnel to get the job done. Leaders inspire their personnel. Managers build a fire under your butt. Leaders build a fire in your belly. Hands-on managers cultivate obedience. Hands-off leaders cultivate independence and resourcefulness. Managers consider themselves part of an exclusive club. Leaders maintain the respect and fellowship of the rank and file. Managers accept credit for the success of their subordinates. Leaders turn away from the spotlight, letting it shine upon those they have the honor to lead. When a project turns sour, the manager asks, "Who is responsible?" The leader says, "I am." You work overtime for a manager. You work all the time for a leader. Managers need to continually make their presence known. Leaders inspire from afar, even from the grave. And I truly believe all that. And if you remember even half the things I said today and take them to heart and use them, you'll be an effective leader and a better engineer down the road. You bet, and that's something I meant to talk about. First off, we're in a state of transition right now. We are flying out the last 3 shuttle missions. We got one coming up here February 24th, then in April, and then in June. Might slip a little bit, but 3 more shuttle flights, and the shuttle is ending its career. And we're transitioning to a commercial model for operations to low Earth orbit. And then NASA's going to have a large program with a heavy lift rocket and crew vehicle that will take us exploring beyond our home planet. All right? So at Kennedy Space Center right now, I'm looking at the loss of 6,500 real high quality engineers and technicians that work for our contractors. The civil service organization is going to stay about the same, 2,100. At the peak of Apollo, NASA went at KSC went from about 25,000 contractors and civil servants down to 8,500. We've had about 15,000, and we're going to go down to about 8,500 or so also. So my goal is to develop a very strong institutional engineering base at the Kennedy Space Center that provides matrix to support to multiple programs. Now we'll still have our launch services program. They procure all the expendable rockets for NASA's science missions. We got one coming up here at the end of February, launching from the West Coast, the Glory mission. Mars Science Lab's coming up, all kinds of neat stuff. Commercial operations. Right now, we're going to have to rely on our Russian partners. We're buying seats on Soyuz spacecraft to get crews to and from International Space Station. International Space Station is going to go on to 2020, all right? We don't want to have to rely on the Russians in a Soyuz spacecraft and rocket. Very reliable, but we need our own access. So we're working on a commercial capability. I was just out in Denver last couple days at Sierra Nevada Corporation looking at what they want to enter into the commercial market with. And it's a lifting body based on the HL-20 design that NASA had that they want to stick on an Atlas rocket. SpaceX is building their Dragon capsule on the Falcon 9 that they want to use. Orbital Sciences Corporation has come up with a design. Boeing is working on a design. The way we're going about this is different from previous NASA programs, but when you consider we've been flying in space for 40 years, 50 since this will be the 50th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's flight this April, coming up here, April 12th. He first flew April 12th, 1961. 20 years later, April 12th, 1981, we launched the shuttle on its first flight. So, I mean, we've been flying the shuttle for 30 years. we know what's required to get to low Earth orbit. So we can trust commercial companies to build the right vehicle if we provide them with the right requirements and we have some insight into what we're doing. And then we're going to focus on this heavy lift program, which is really hard. A mission to Mars right now with current propulsion technology, it's a year and a half to get there, do the exploration, have the planets in the right place so you can get home. The systems that we have, think of what goes into keeping people alive. You know, science missions, sending a probe off, it's easy in that vacuum of space. Well, even that's hard, all right? But then you throw a human in the loop, and you got to give them air to breathe and keep the temperature right and provide a pressurized volume for them. You got to give them food to eat. You got to get rid of all his waste, all the water. I mean, that is a huge problem, all right? So there's going to be some complicated, costly engineering and design work that goes into that vehicle and that mission to make that happen. That's not quite ready for a commercial model yet, so that's where NASA is going to focus its efforts. So we're in a stage of transition. Once we get established, I think there's going to be great opportunity for commercial space within Brevard County and at the Kennedy Space Center. And this heavy lift program, you know, it's going to require some great engineers working here and around the country. So I believe there are going to be jobs, and it's going to be hard getting there, but once we get there, we're going to be in a good place.
Changing roles from being an engineer, doing the problem, to overseeing that. How did you handle that transition, and how long?
I probably didn't solve it as quickly as I should have. You know, because I love doing a problem. We all like to solve problems, don't we? Or we wouldn't be engineers. Again, it depends on what the job is and how you're progressing, what level of responsibility, and so on. You know, at the lower levels, as part of a team, leading a team, you're going to be involved in the solving of the problem. You know, leading a bunch of teams, it's much harder. You know, but you can offer advice and guide people. And you know, one of the things that you end up doing as you grow in your leadership is you become a mentor to the younger engineers. You know, you got to share your experience with them and help them grow and point them in the right direction. So, you know, I think it was probably, I guess after my last space flight, you know, when I was working in the International Space Station program, chairing multiple boards and panels on how we were building the space station, and you know, you got all these engineers bringing these technical problems, and you can't solve it, but you can see that they've gotten to the right solution, that it's going to work. And another thing, let me share this with you real quick. You know, there's the engineering side of things, and then there's the programmatic side of things. Large programs, you know, at the Kennedy Space Center, we got a lot of engineers that support matrix support to different programs. That program manager, he's got a fixed budget and a time schedule that he has to meet. That engineer, he says, I think you got a bottomless pit of money, and I want as long as I need to make this absolutely perfect, all right? And, you know, we all love that perfect engineering solution, but, you know, a lot of times the 80% solution is probably good enough. And you got to take into consideration that you can't engineer it forever. Eventually you got to go do it. And so remember that when you get in a position. Most programs don't have bottomless pits of money, and they got a tight schedule that they have to meet. And you can't always get the perfect solution. Good enough oftentimes is good enough.
What do you believe about the innovative lunar demonstrations being provided by the companies competing in the Google Lunar X Prize?
I think that anything that we can do to stimulate an interest in flying in space is absolutely fantastic, and innovation is great. You know, if I look back on, let's take aviation. December 17th, 1903, Orville and Wilbur flew the Wright Flyer out at Kitty Hawk, a distance of 120 feet, and it lasted about 20 seconds. All right? So that was 108 years ago. And the space shuttle is 120 feet long, and it can go a lot further than 120 feet. You know, but so that was back then, and aviation just trucked along kind of flat. And you got up into the 30s after World War II, and they had all these biplanes left over, and you had all these barnstormers taking people up for rides and stuff. And World War II came in the jet age, and And look at today. Aviation has just taken off exponentially today. When you look at what computers have done and composites and all the technology that we have in CFD and everything else, you name it, it's amazing what we can do when we build an airplane compared to where we started 108 years ago. All these folks, X-Corps, you know, everybody else that are just, you know, the White Knight and Virgin Galactic, taking folks up for flight in a parabolic arc. Well, yeah, NASA did that back in, you know, 1961 in May when Alan Shepard made the first U.S. flight in a rocket. Didn't even orbit, just went up, came down, all right, got into space in a Mercury capsule. Well, we know how to do that, but you know, it's kind of like the barnstormers back then offering people a ride in a Jenny or something to go up and fly around for a little bit. It stimulates interest in the industry. And so space is still back there on that flat part of the curve. We got a long ways to go before we take off exponentially, and it's going to take some kind of great propulsion technology breakthrough. You know, if one of you guys go develop a warp drive for me, okay? And, and then we'll have some real fun. So, you know, do I support all of that? Absolutely, because it generates interest in the industry, and it generates folks going into fields, you know, all the STEM fields, math, science, engineering, technology. We need it as a country. I'm really proud of each and every one of you, okay? Math and engineering are hard. Well, I don't think they are. They're fun, all right? Really, they're fun. And it's a lot of people are afraid of them because they don't know any better. And they don't have a reason to get involved because they don't have a goal of what they want to do. I hope all of you have a goal of what you want to do and how you're going to apply all this math and engineering that you're learning now. But, you know, if we are going to remain a world leader, we need to actually produce something. And how in the heck are we going to produce something if we don't have engineers to build it and design it? All right? So I want to see more folks getting into this field, and if any of this stimulates an interest in folks becoming engineers and being involved in space exploration, I'm all for it. You know, first off, on a space shuttle flight, my longest space shuttle flight was 16 days. My third flight, we set the record for the longest space shuttle mission, which got broken a year or two after that. But space shuttle flights are easy. The real interaction of the crew comes in training. You're assigned a year ahead of time. And, you know, it's kind of like being in a family. You get assigned to this crew, and there's thought that goes into balancing the crew with all the right skills and everything. You can't have all the best people on it. You can't have all the worst people. You can't have all the experience. You gotta mix a skills that you put together. But like a family, you know, you don't get to choose your mom and dad and your brothers or your sisters. It's not like your friends. You're stuck with them, all right? And you're kind of stuck with your crew. And, you know, think how things go in your family. It's not perfect all the time. People get in arguments and, you know, things happen, all right? Well, things happen training for a flight too. But you really bond during that year, and you work through your differences and your problems, and you come together on orbit for that time period, and you work really hard, and you excel at what you're doing. On a space station flight, you might be up there for 6 months, and you really need to learn how to get along. But, I mean, there's always going to be interactions that cause stress and tension and stuff. All the crew members on the space station, and this is a luxury we didn't have on the shuttle, have their own little crew compartment where they can keep all their stuff, where they can just go sleep. I mean, it's their space. And everybody needs a little alone time now and then. And actually, the space station's big enough now that you could probably go off somewhere and hide for a while and just be by yourself. But I think it'll play into when we do a mission to Mars, and you're a year and a half in a confined space with a lot of challenges, and you have to deal with the problems and stuff. You know, there's testing that we do for astronauts. There are folks that, you know, we have psychological testing to be selected. Not everybody passes. We test for claustrophobia and a lot of other stuff. But there's selection process to get in to be an astronaut, and then there is thought that goes into how crews are assigned. So I think it's important.
Who would you say were your mentors?
I remember one squadron commanding officer I had, Clyde Smith from Park Rapids, Minnesota. How many saw the movie Flight of the Intruder? where Danny Glover was in it, and they get shot down in Vietnam, and they run around on the ground, and they eventually get rescued. That was actually based on a true story, only it was a Marine pilot, not a Navy pilot. And he was my CO, and Clyde Smith. And he got shot down and spent 3 days evading on the ground before he got picked up. His bombardier navigator was shot and killed, though, unlike the movie where they both got out. And he was just this, 6'2", John Wayne-looking Swede that was just, I mean, he could do no wrong in my eyes. And he was really, really a good stick. And it was fun going out flying with him because we'd have competitions. Who could be the best bomber? Who could be the best in-flight refueler or whatever? And I just, I won't forget that. When I went off to test pilot school, my group commander had tried to get into the astronaut program back in the 60s. He was a test pilot back in the 60s. He really supported me applying for test pilot school and going. Ned Carlton, really a neat guy, and he used to share a lot of stories with me about being a test pilot and stuff. I'll never forget, he pulled me aside when I was heading off to Pax River, and he says, "Bob, I'll tell you 2 things. This will keep you safe. If you're in a jet, don't get slower than 150 knots in the landing pattern, and if you're in a prop, don't get slower than 100, and you'll be okay." And good advice. Gosh, when I look back, when I got selected to be an astronaut, John Young was chief of the astronaut office. I mean, his office is right down the hall. I'm working for a man that flew Gemini, walked on the moon in Apollo, did the first space shuttle mission. What a guy to emulate and want to be like.
Or they do have some sort of a pitfall. What are some good ways of addressing that without being negative?
Yeah, and by not addressing it, just ignoring a problem, no problem gets better over time. It'll just get worse. It'll cause the group to work even poorer together. You have to get it out on the table and discuss it. And within a group, I mean, you can go offer someone, say, "Hey, have you thought about maybe doing this?" Or again, it depends on the problem. It's really hard. What you don't want to do is get the whole group together and pick on somebody, all right, and just be down on them. I've found that a couple things. First off, most folks do a lot better with positive reinforcement than they do with negative reinforcement. And I didn't talk about that during the lecture, but you can drive a team to the absolute highest performance very quick by just being really hard on them and pushing them and being mean. But if you want to get to the highest level of performance of that team, it's got to be done through positive reinforcement and positive leadership. And so if you can find ways to make a discussion positive and not pick on somebody and offer them, say, "Hey, could you do this, or would you consider this, or work on this?" That helps, but don't ignore it. And you can it's probably better rather than get the whole group together, and if one person in the group, leader whatever of that group, goes and talks to that person and says, "Hey, you gotta help a little bit more here. We need your help, and if this team is going to be successful, this is what you have to do." And maybe they thought they were, or maybe they didn't understand something, and just do you clearly understand what we need done? Is there something you don't understand? How can we work together so that we can get to the goal and accomplish it? I didn't give you a very good answer there, but it's kind of specific, and again, the hardest thing is, I'll back up. On one of my crews, I had 2 people that were just absolutely bringing the whole team down because they were not getting along with each other, all right? And one of them could sit and look at a problem, and they'd analyze it, and they'd say, "That's the answer," all right? And if you deviated from where they wanted to go, they were just intolerable to be with. And the person that person was working with would look at the problem and say, "The answer's somewhere in there. I want to know what the boundaries are." And so they're out there defining the edge of the envelope all the way around it. So you got this very straight, systematic, analyzed person working here, and this other person on the same problem is bouncing off the boundaries. And it was just killing this person in the middle that this other person was doing that. And it was killing this person, and that other person was so inflexible as not to understand, you know. In the end, they both ended up at the same spot, all right? But it caused a lot of angst getting there. And so what I had to do is I started with individual counseling sessions with each of them, explaining how their performance and what they were doing was detracting from the performance of the team. And then I got them both together, and the three of us sat around a table, and we got it out in the open, and we explained everything, and we talked about it, and I got them to understand each other. And we had like weekly counseling sessions. I felt like a therapist. You know, and eventually we stopped. And when we flew, and after the mission, they were the best of friends. They got along so well, and the mission was successful, and everything was good. But, you know, a lot of it is you got to get your feelings out on the table. You got to be willing to discuss them, and you can't hold them in. If you hold back, if you don't communicate, you know, you're not going to get there. And it's hard. You know, engineers aren't touchy-feely kind of people. You know, we like, here's the problem, here's your tools, and you like to go solve it. And you don't want to be distracted, you don't want to be bothered, you just want to go do the job. And sometimes, you know, you got to talk a little bit too to get the team together and get to the right answer.
What's the most interesting problem you've ever had to solve?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most fun problems I had to solve was when I was a project pilot on the X-29 forward swept wing aircraft for DARPA. And we were developing the flight control system for it, and flying the CalSpan has an aircraft they call a total in-flight simulator, and it's a T-29 with a cockpit, and using computers you program it. And so for the approach and land phase, you're sitting in this thing and it feels like you're flying this forward swept wing jet coming in to land instead of a T-29. They do it now with a variable stability Learjet. Really cool. But helping develop the flight control system for approach and landing on that aircraft, evaluating it, and you know, going back, gosh, I wish I could, you know, if I could remember half of what I've forgotten, I'd be brilliant. But I think back on all those control laws and the equations that goes into, you know, writing stuff like that, and that was a lot of fun. My leadership has evolved over time, and you know, I'm a much better leader today than I was, you know, as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, because hopefully I've learned from my mistakes. But when I was a pilot in the Marine Corps, I thought I worked with the best group of folks anywhere. When I got to test pilot school, it was a step above that as a flight test, or as an engineer at Pax River, engineering test pilot. When I got to NASA, it was a step above that. Now, when I got selected to be an astronaut, I was a major in the Marine Corps. And I spent half my Marine Corps career at NASA, wearing civilian clothes to work, and a uniform on occasion. Then I retired from the Marine Corps and just continued to work for NASA. So my transition from the Marine Corps to NASA wasn't really a transition. I just kept doing the same job. I just was working directly for NASA now. About half the astronaut office is active duty military, and NASA reimburses the Department of Defense for their pay and allowances. So, you know, I just was put in positions where, like when I was the Deputy Chief of Aircraft Operations as an astronaut, you know, that was my collateral duty. I was still training to fly in space, but I was the Deputy Chief of this organization that had, you know, 350 people and 50 airplanes and a huge budget, and, you know, so, you know, I was developing leadership. And the boss that I worked for, Joel Granny, he was a dive bomber pilot in World War II and test pilot, and he didn't care about anything that had to do with facilities or people. All he cared about were the technical problems. So he did all the technical stuff, and all the people and facilities stuff he left for me. So even though I was a deputy, I got to be in charge of it all. I learned a lot. Then I ended up in other leadership positions, Chief of the Astronaut Office. You know, I had 100 and some astronauts working for me, a very small budget, because, you know, you don't have all the money's in the program. You know, they're the ones that do the work. So it was kind of like having 100 teenagers working for me, and you know, all type A personalities wanting to go their own way and do their own thing. And had to corral them. That was a leadership challenge, different kind of challenge. I don't know. I guess it's all been good. It's just, oh, the other thing I got to tell you, when you get asked to do something, don't say no. All right? I don't care what it is. Go do it. If your boss wants you to do it, aye, aye, sir. You know, if they make you, what I told my son went into the Marine Corps. He's flying Ospreys in the tilt rotor aircraft now. I said, Jeff, if they make you the coffee mess officer and you're in charge of that when you get into a squadron, be the best damn coffee mess officer they ever had. Because they'll recognize your talent, that you're doing a good job, and they'll give you more responsibility. You know, I loved being at the Johnson Space Center and doing all the things that I was doing there. When they asked me to go to Russia and live in Russia and run our operations in Russia, I didn't feel real keen about, you know, packing up and moving to Russia, but I did it. And it was one of the best years and a half of my life. I really enjoyed living over there, working with the Russians. I'd already been working with them, but more closely with them while we were building the space station and training crews and stuff over there. When I got asked to go be the director of the Stennis Space Center, you know, I went from the Johnson Space Center, which, you know, 24-hour operation, space shuttle, space station, technical problems, 3,600 civil servants, 18,000 contractors, to little old Stennis, Mississippi, where I had 235 civil servants, but I was kind of the mayor of this federal city, and we were just testing engines. I didn't necessarily want to pack up and go do that, but I said, okay, and I loved it. It was great. And then I got asked to go be the director of the Kennedy Space Center, and wow, that was like awesome. Now I'm back in this big organization with all these technical challenges and doing all these neat things, but I learned a lot for that year I was in Mississippi leading that smaller group. So never say no. Just go off and do it, and I guarantee you, you'll be surprised. If you do it with a good attitude, you're going to learn a lot and have fun. But more importantly, if you do well at it, your expertise and how you do is going to be recognized, and more responsibility will be given to you.